The key doesn't fit. Renee Calloway stands on her own front porch at 11:42 on a Tuesday, rain coming down steady and grey, jiggling a key she has used 4,000 times. Right key, wrong lock. In the driveway, her suitcase sits open in the trunk, a blouse sleeve hanging out of it, soaking, because it wouldn't close and she didn't have time to make it. She knocks 3 knuckles, the old rhythm, it's just me. Upstairs, a light burns behind the curtain of what used to be her bedroom. The curtain doesn't move. Marcus, not loud, a wife's voice, not a stranger's. Her phone buzzes. She looks anyway, the way you check a wound to see if it's still bleeding. Delivered, not read. The 3 dots that used to appear under David's name haven't shown up in 6 days. A shape moves in the window that used to be Zoe's, fairy lights still up at 16, a face lit blue from below by her own phone. Zoe looks at her mother the way you look at a stranger's dog that got loose in your yard. Not cruel, just far enough away that it costs her nothing. Renee's hand stays on the door. Rain finds her collar and runs down her back. She doesn't cry yet. That comes later, in the car, engine running, nowhere to drive. But to understand how we got here, we have to go back. The good life that wasn't. 11 months earlier, Renee would have called it a good marriage and believed it while she said it. 13 years in, Marcus up at 5, home by 4:30 with sawdust ground into his knuckles, still opening her car door on Sundays out of a habit that had outlived the reason for it, still saying grace in the same flat voice he'd used since they were 24, one hand flat on the table like he was steadying something that might tip. There had been a second pregnancy, and then one March there hadn't been. Marcus went quiet after that, not gone, home every night, decent every night, but something behind his face pulled back from the switch. He started praying in his truck before coming inside. Renee saw him once through the kitchen window, forehead on the wheel, lips moving, and didn't go out to him. She worked the front desk at a physical therapy clinic, loving her children in the exhausted way of a woman who's given herself away in pieces, until loving someone and narrating logistics at them start to feel the same. "We don't fight," she told her sister once, like it was a medal. She was 39 and had started to notice men noticing her and to feel, for the first time in years, seen, not touched. Seen the way a woman is seen before she becomes somebody's wife and disappears a little into the furniture of everyone else's life. The forgotten day. The clinic hired a billing consultant that spring, David Ray's, 36, 8 months out of a divorce, still raw enough to bleed through his jokes. He remembered things, that her son played travel ball, that her mother had died in October 3 years back. On the anniversary, he left a coffee on her desk with a sticky note, "Thinking of you today," and it was the only acknowledgement she got all day, because Marcus, buried under a job running long, simply forgot. He forgot that was the door, not a scandal, a decent man's exhaustion, colliding with a private grief she'd been bracing herself to carry alone. Driving home with David's cup sweating in her cup holder, she told herself she wasn't doing anything wrong, only noticing who paid attention. Noticing wasn't a sin. There is a way that seems right to a man. A verse from Sunday school surfaced once, unbidden, and sank again before she could hold it. The language no one else speaks. By June they were texting daily, a claim, a joke, a longer joke, a paragraph about the nursing degree she never finished, a paragraph back about an ex-wife who never once asked what he wanted for himself. Her stomach lifted at his name on her screen, a 19-year-old's feeling, and she told herself it was harmless because it lived only in her body. At home, Marcus asleep in his recliner by 9 most nights, worn through by a job site riding him hard. She'd sit 2 feet away, phone lit, heart already somewhere else, and think, he doesn't even see me anymore. It did not occur to her to ask what she looked like from where he sat. In July, at a conference 2 hours from home, dinner ran to 11. David walked her to her hotel door, and she let the moment stretch 3 seconds past what friendship required before saying goodnight. Alone inside, heart going hard, she said out loud to the empty room, nothing happened, and nothing had with her hands. Everything had already happened in the part of her that had decided she was owed something, and that being owed a thing is the same as having the right to take it. The weight he carried alone. Marcus didn't know David's name that summer. He knew smaller things, that his wife angled her phone away from him on the couch now, that she took calls in the driveway before coming inside, that she laughed once at her screen, unguarded, the laugh she used to save for him, and closed the app so fast the motion itself said everything her mouth didn't. He didn't confront her. At 14, he'd stood in a hallway listening to his own father interrogate his mother through a door and had promised himself he'd never be that man. So he built things instead. He reframed the back porch alone across 4 August weekends, headlamp on, long past dark, long past any need for it, a man translating an ache into 2x6s because he had no other language for it. He found her wedding ring on the windowsill one night, left behind after dishes. He turned it once under the kitchen light and set it back exactly where he'd found it, as if moving it would make the moment more real than he could hold. Then he sat in his dark truck for 11 minutes, hands on the wheel, praying words he couldn't have repeated if you'd asked him. No raised voice, no scene. A beam gives out the same way, quietly, holding its shape right up until it doesn't. The room she started locking. September, David's apartment, a lunch that ran 3 hours. Afterward, checking her phone on his nightstand while he showered, a text from Micah lit the screen. "Mom, can you get the blue folder? It's on the counter." And she answered, "Yes, baby," with the same thumbs that 4 minutes earlier had been laced through another man's hair. That collision was the first real crack. She started locking her phone that fall, deleting threads nightly, 11 seconds, unthinking as brushing teeth. At church in October, the pastor preached from Hosea, a prophet told to marry a woman who would betray him, a living picture of a people unfaithful to a God who kept loving them anyway. Renee sat with her hands folded and let the sermon land a foot to her left, a story about ancient people, nothing that could possibly describe her Thursday afternoons. Marcus, beside her, went very still and didn't look at her once. She filed it under tired. She knelt at her bed one night that November, out of buried muscle memory, and prayed, "God, you see my heart. You know I'm not a bad person," and meant every word of it. She was not lying. She had simply built a house of reasonable-sounding rooms until she couldn't find the door back outside it. Zoe, 16, found a name lighting the counter too often and said nothing, only started watching her mother the way you watch a bridge you've heard might be failing. A worship song made her snap the radio off too fast. A young couple laughing in a Target parking lot put her in her car for 5 minutes before she could drive. Twice that month she dreamed of her childhood home, opening door after door, each room smaller than the last, and woke with her heart slamming, unable to say what she'd been looking for. She read all of it as stress. The night everything broke. By January, David had started dating someone unmarried, someone without another man's children attached, and he didn't tell her. He just got slower to answer, shorter when he did. She told herself he was busy. On a Tuesday, Zoe picked her mother's phone up off the counter while Renee showered, thumbed in the code she'd watched her enter a dozen times without meaning to, and read 4 months of it in 11 minutes, back against her bedroom door. She forwarded 3 screenshots to her father, then sat on her bed and waited, 16, having just said out loud the thing she'd been the only one brave enough to look at directly. Marcus read the first message standing in the garage. He read it again sitting on an overturned paint bucket. He didn't throw anything, didn't call anyone. He sat in the cold for nearly 40 minutes and came inside with the gray stillness of a man watching 13 years give way all at once, without a sound. He set his phone on the kitchen table, screen up, and said only, "I need you to tell me the truth, and I need you to understand I already know it." She told him everything, flatly, in a kitchen gone cold, while Zoe lay upstairs listening to the silences between her parents' sentences and Micah slept through it, innocent, a little longer. He asked her to leave that night. 2 weeks later, he changed the locks, not vengeance, he'd say later, but needing one thing in his life that felt chosen instead of simply happening to him. She came back in the rain, with a suitcase that wouldn't close, and stood on a porch that no longer opened for her key. That is the moment where we began. VII, the far country. She lived with her sister for 6 weeks under a quilt that wasn't hers, picking Micah up from school in a carpool line where other mothers watched her with the pity and appetite reserved for a scandal they get to enjoy from a safe distance. David didn't call. When she finally called him, voice cracking, asking if any of it had been real, he told her not unkindly, which was worse, that they both knew it had run its course, that he was seeing someone, that he hoped things worked out with Marcus. He said it the way you end a lease. She laughed once afterward in a grocery store parking lot, short and ugly, at the size of her own mistake. Zoe went flat and functional. Okay, fine, whatever you think is best, built to give away nothing, because she'd already given away the one thing she couldn't get back. Marcus never badmouthed her to the kids. When Zoe tested him once, hoping he'd agree with something cruel about her mother, he only said, "That's still your mom, and it isn't as simple as it looks from where you're standing," which cost him to say. Alone at night, he started reading his Bible again, opening to whatever page it fell to. One February night, it fell to Nathan standing in front of David, telling a story about a rich man who stole a poor man's only lamb. David, righteously furious, declaring the man deserved to die, not yet understanding the story was about him. "You are the man," 4 words. Marcus sat with them longer than he wanted to, because he understood, uncomfortably, they weren't only meant for the one who'd broken the vow. He hadn't been faithless, but he'd stopped fighting for the marriage long before she stopped being faithful to it, and called the distance peace, because peace required nothing of him. VII, what remains? It was Micah, 9, chicken fingers going cold on his plate at a supervised dinner, who cracked her open. "Did you stop loving Dad?" he asked. No cruelty in it, only confusion. "Or did you just forget to keep doing it?" She didn't answer for almost a full minute. "I think I forgot to keep doing it," she finally said. "That's not the same as stopping, but I understand now it can look the same from the outside." She drove that night not to her sister's, but to the chapel she'd been baptized in at 19, arriving after the doors were locked, and sat on the concrete steps in the cold for over an hour, telling God the truth out loud with no one to perform it for. She used the word adultery, not mistake, not a season I'm not proud of, for the first time, and something clenched for months came apart into grief instead of relief. Counseling wasn't gentle. Marcus, at their first joint session, 3 feet away in chairs that didn't touch, told her, "I want you to hear this clearly. I am not there yet. I don't know if I will be. I'm willing to find out slowly, with both of us doing the work, but I won't pretend to be somewhere I'm not just to make this easier." It took 14 months, actual months, of Tuesday sessions, of nights he still slept in the guest room without either of them calling it punishment, of Zoe needing her own year of therapy before she could sit across from her mother without her jaw locking. It took a year of Sundays before Renee could hear Hosea and let it land on her instead of beside her. 2 years on, Marcus still sometimes watches her check her phone, a small tax that outlived its cause. Trust, once actually broken, doesn't reset to 0, it heals the way bone heals, stronger at the break, never forgetting it broke. Last spring, home from her first semester of college, Zoe asked her at the kitchen counter at midnight, "Were you happy when it was happening?" Renee could have lied. "For a while I thought I was," she said instead. "I know now I was just being noticed, and I mistook that for being loved. I hope you never confuse those the way I did." Zoe put her hand over her mother's for a moment and took it away again. It was enough. David Ray's moved out of state the next year. The relationship he'd left her for didn't last either. She felt, hearing that, not vindication, but a tired recognition. He'd been chasing the same ache she had, in the same wrong direction. Marcus still builds things. The porch still stands. Some evenings they sit on it after the kids are down, not always talking. And she understands now that this, a quiet man who broke silently and rebuilt the same way, who stayed, was the love story all along. Some Sundays are still hard. Some words Marcus still can't say out loud. Renee still flinches at her own reflection some mornings. There is no bow on this. But she knows now what she didn't know standing on that porch in the rain. The ache she mistook for evidence Her marriage was over was never about Marcus. It was a woman who'd quietly stopped believing she deserved to be seen, looking for it in the one place it was never going to be found. What she has now is smaller than the fantasy and larger than the fear. A marriage honest instead of comfortable. A daughter learning people can fail you and still be worth loving. A husband who keeps choosing to stay because he believes God isn't finished with either of them yet. Not a fairy tale, not a punishment. Just finally, the truth.